I used to dread July, not because of vacations or anything like that, but because every single summer I'd walk out to my garden and watch plants I'd spent months growing just collapse. Wilted, brown, done, and I'd stand there in the heat thinking, what am I doing wrong? I watered them, I fertilized them, I did everything the tag said. But the sun didn't care, and neither did the heat. It just kept coming. If you've ever felt that frustration, that sinking feeling when your garden looks beautiful in May, and looks like a disaster zone by August, then I need you to stay with me through this entire video, because what I'm about to share took me years of failed summers and wasted money to figure out. And I'm going to save you all of that. These 12 perennials don't just survive summer heat, they thrive in it. And by the time we get to number 3 on this list, you're going to understand why it completely changed how I think about summer gardening. Let's get into it. Number 12, lantana. Lantana is one of those plants that almost seems like it was designed for punishment. The hotter it gets, the more it blooms. I first planted lantana along my south-facing fence where nothing else would survive. Full afternoon sun, reflecting heat off the wood, bone-dry soil by evening. Lantana didn't flinch, which honestly makes the garden feel alive even on the hottest days. And it blooms continuously from late spring all the way until the first frost. It's also a magnet for butterflies and hummingbirds, which honestly makes the garden feel alive even on the hottest days. It handles drought well once established, and it spreads nicely to fill gaps. One thing to know, in warmer USDA zones, zones 8 through 11, lantana is a true perennial and will come back every year. In colder zones, it's treated as an annual, but it's worth replanting every season for what it gives you. Number 11, coneflower. I know, everybody talks about echinacea, but there's a reason it keeps showing up on every heat-tolerant list. It genuinely earns its place. Coneflowers are native to the American prairie, which means they evolved in a place with blazing summers, minimal rainfall, and clay-heavy soil. Sound familiar? The classic purple coneflower is beautiful, but the breeding done over the last 2 decades has produced varieties in deep red, orange, yellow, white, and even coral. They bloom for months, they self-seed if you let the heads stand, and they attract both pollinators and birds. I've had coneflowers in my garden for over a decade, and they come back stronger every year with zero babying. Plant them in full sun, give them decent drainage, and then walk away. They don't need you hovering over them, and honestly, they do better when you don't. Number 10, black-eyed Susan. If there's one plant that screams American summer garden, it's black-eyed Susan. That bright yellow flower with the dark center is iconic, and for good reason. That bright yellow flower with the dark center is iconic, and for good reason. Rudbeckia thrives in heat, tolerates drought once established, and spreads naturally over time to fill in bare spots. I planted a small cluster of these about 6 years ago along my garden border, and now I have a full sweep of golden yellow that blooms from midsummer into fall. They pair beautifully with ornamental grasses and coneflowers. They do reseed aggressively, so if you want to keep them contained, deadhead before the seeds fully mature. But if you want a naturalistic, low-maintenance border that handles summer like a champion, let them spread. Birds also love the seed heads in late fall and winter, so leaving some standing adds habitat value to your homestead. Number 9, yarrow. Yarrow is one of those plants that serious homesteaders learn to appreciate deeply. It's not just ornamental, it has a long history of medicinal use. But from a pure gardening standpoint, it's a heat and drought machine. Yarrow has feathery fern-like foliage and produces flat-topped flower clusters in white, yellow, red, salmon, and pink. It blooms heavily in early summer, and if you cut it back after the first flush, it'll rebloom into fall. It spreads by rhizomes and by seed, which means once you plant it, you'll have plenty to divide and spread around. In terms of soil, yarrow actually prefers lean, well-drained soil. Rich soil makes it flop. So if you've got that tough, somewhat neglected patch where nothing else thrives, yarrow might be exactly what you need. It also dries beautifully for arrangements and wreaths, which is a nice bonus if you do any crafting or selling at farmers markets. Number 8, agastache. Agastache is one of the most underrated perennials in the American garden, and I genuinely don't understand why it doesn't get more attention. It handles heat and drought with ease. It blooms for months in shades of purple, blue, orange, and pink. And it is absolutely covered in pollinators from morning to evening. Bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, they all love it. I grow several varieties, and the one called Blue Fortune is particularly reliable. It gets about 3 feet tall and wide, produces dense spikes of lavender blue flowers, and has anise-scented foliage that deer tend to avoid. Agastache does need good drainage. It will rot in wet, heavy soil, but in average to dry conditions it performs beautifully. Cut it back by about a third in midsummer to encourage a fresh flush of blooms heading into fall. Number 7. Gaura. Gaura is a Texas native, and that alone should tell you everything about its heat tolerance. It produces long, wiry stems covered in small white or pink flowers that flutter in the breeze like tiny butterflies, which is why it's sometimes called whirling butterflies. It blooms from late spring all the way through fall without stopping, and it handles heat, humidity, and drought without complaint. The key to success with Gaura is drainage. It has a deep taproot and absolutely cannot tolerate wet feet. But in the right conditions, it's as close to a no-maintenance perennial as I've ever grown. I use it as a filler between larger plants because it adds movement and lightness without taking up much space. It's especially effective in the front or middle of a border where you want something that looks effortless even in peak summer heat. Number 6. Sedum. Now we're getting into the real workhorses. Sedum is practically indestructible. The upright varieties like Autumn Joy or Matrona grow in clumps and produce large flower heads that start out as green or pink buds and mature to deep rose and eventually russet in fall. They're drought-tolerant, heat-tolerant, deer-resistant, and they require almost no care whatsoever. I've divided my sedum clumps many times over the years and given starts to neighbors and friends. It's one of the most generous plants I know. The late season bloom is particularly valuable because by August and September, a lot of the garden is winding down and sedum is just hitting its stride. The seed heads also stand through winter and provide visual interest and food for birds. If you only plant one new thing this summer, make it sedum. Alright, we're at the halfway point of this list, and before I keep going, I want you to think about something. You've probably tried at least some of these plants before, or something similar, and maybe had mixed results. The difference between success and failure with heat-tolerant perennials usually isn't the plant, it's the planting. Most heat lovers fail not because of too much sun, but because of too much water, too much fertilizer, and soil that holds moisture when it should be draining. The plants coming up in the second half of this list are the ones that transformed my summer garden from a disaster zone into something I'm actually proud of. And number 3 is the one I wish I'd known about years earlier. Keep watching. Number 5. Coreopsis. Coreopsis is a sun-loving, heat-loving, drought-tolerant powerhouse that blooms in shades of yellow, gold, orange, and red for most of the summer. The threadleaf varieties like Zagreb and Moonbeam are particularly tough. Fine, feathery foliage with masses of small flowers that look delicate but are actually incredibly resilient. I grow Coreopsis along the edge of my gravel path, where the ground gets brutally hot in summer, and it thrives there. It self-seeds lightly, so you'll get new plants each year without doing anything. It also attracts pollinators and small birds. If you deadhead consistently, it blooms longer. If you don't have time for that, just cut the whole plant back by half in midsummer, and it will flush with new growth and flowers within a few weeks. Easy, beautiful, and absolutely heat-proof. Number 4. Russian sage. Russian sage is one of those plants that looks like it belongs in a dream garden. Tall silvery stems, lavender blue flower spikes, aromatic foliage, and it requires almost nothing from you. It's native to the dry steppes of Central Asia, which means it was built for heat, drought, and tough conditions. It gets 3 to 5 feet tall and wide and blooms from midsummer into fall. I use it at the back of borders where I need something tall and airy that won't flop or need staking. It's deer-resistant, it's drought-tolerant once established, and it pairs beautifully with ornamental grasses, echinacea, and black-eyed Susans. The only real requirement is drainage. Russian sage will not perform in wet, heavy clay without amendment. But in well-drained soil and full sun, it's one of the most reliable and spectacular perennials you can grow. Cut it back hard in early spring to about 6 inches, and it will grow back full and strong every year. Number 3, Baptisia. Here it is, the one I wish someone had told me about 15 years ago. Baptisia is a native North American perennial that is, without exaggeration, one of the most resilient and beautiful plants I have ever grown. It forms a large, shrub-like mound of blue-green foliage that looks good from spring through fall, and in late spring it produces spikes of pea-like flowers in deep indigo blue, white, or yellow, depending on the variety. The flowers are gorgeous, but here's the thing. After the blooms fade, the plant continues to perform as a structural foliage plant for the rest of the season. It has an incredibly deep taproot, which means once it's established, and I want to be clear, it takes 2 to 3 years to really establish. It is essentially indestructible. Heat, drought, poor soil, it handles all of it. It's also completely deer resistant because the foliage contains compounds deer don't like. It doesn't need dividing, it doesn't need staking, it doesn't need fertilizing. It just grows and improves every single year. The reason it's number 3 on this list instead of number 1 is only because of that establishment period. It asks for patience up front, but once it's in, you will never regret planting it. Number 2, catmint. Catmint is the plant I recommend to every single person who tells me they want a low-maintenance, high-impact perennial for a hot, dry spot. It produces masses of small lavender blue flowers on arching stems from late spring into early summer. And if you cut it back by half after the first bloom, it will rebloom through summer and into fall. The foliage is soft, aromatic, and silvery gray-green, which makes it attractive even when it's not in bloom. It spreads at a moderate pace to fill in gaps, it's drought-tolerant, it's deer-resistant, it's pollinator-friendly, and it looks beautiful spilling over edges and along paths. The variety Walker's Low is the most commonly grown, and for good reason. It's reliable, well-behaved, and spectacular in mass plantings. I have it lining the front of my perennial border, and it softens the whole edge beautifully. It pairs well with roses, salvias, and ornamental grasses. If you want one plant that does everything without demanding anything, catmint is it. Number 1, salvia, and here we are, number 1. And if you've been gardening in a hot climate for any amount of time, you may already know why salvia earns the top spot. Perennial salvias, and I'm talking about varieties like May Night, Caradonna, East Friesland, and the more tender but spectacular Amistad, are the gold standard for heat tolerance combined with long bloom time, combined with wildlife value, combined with ease of care. They produce upright spikes of violet, purple, blue, or white flowers, and they bloom heavily in late spring, rebloom through summer if dead-headed, and often have a final flush in fall. They're pollinator magnets. Bees cover them from dawn to dusk. Hummingbirds visit constantly. They're deer-resistant, drought-tolerant once established, and they need nothing more than a hard cutback in early spring. In the zones where the tender salvias are perennial, zone 7 and warmer, varieties like Amistad get enormous and bloom for months without stopping. But even in colder zones, the hardy salvias deliver season after season without fail. After years of trial and error, summers of watching plants fail in the heat, salvias are the plant I would choose first if I were starting my garden over from nothing. So there you have it. 12 perennials that don't just survive summer heat, they own it. I want to hear from you now. Which of these are already in your garden, and which ones are you adding this season? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this helped you, share it with someone who's fighting the same battle with their summer garden. There's a video right here that goes deeper into building a drought-tolerant garden that looks intentional, not neglected. I think you'll find it valuable. I'll see you in the next one.